Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We are going to be continuing with another episode of the Dodge Viper DIY Supercharger build today. We're going to do some of the smaller stuff, kind of leading up to getting the Supercharger installed and mounted and all that. Maybe if we're lucky in this episode we'll get to the Supercharger pulley. I don't know if we will or not. I'm sorry, the crank pulley. I'm not sure we will, but we'll try to get to that. But one of the first things I want to touch on is crankcase breathing, and what I mean by that is a lot of people talk about how the Viper has a lack of air flow within the valve covers, and what people will do is they will buy a new, basically, oil cap, and it has a filter or a breather on top of it to help it breathe a little better. I'm not going to do that because those are like 90 bucks. I don't feel it's necessary, especially when the fact that if you see this tube right here that used to go to the intake, it runs to each bank, one on each side here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take those out, and I have purchased two 12mm filters that will protrude and come right off that to give us not only better flow, but to get rid of this extra tubing that we have. So why don't I go ahead and pull that off. It's pretty simple. There's just a couple pinch clips, one on each side here, and that whole thing should pull right out. And then I'm going to go ahead and mount this on, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. Alright guys, so there you have it. It's out right now. What I had to do is obviously you unclip the passenger side first and then the right hand side, and you're going to pull this end out, and it's actually going to have to kind of twist its way out to get it out of here. Now something I want to show you before I go ahead and install the new ones, we obviously can't just stick this on. There's really not enough room. I mean, you could probably fit it, but it's really tight and you're going to be hitting against this bar here. Same with the other side. So what I'm actually going to do is, because I'm never going to use this tube again, I'm going to go ahead and cut about ½ inch from the edge right here, and I'm going to give it 45-degree flanges to stick outward, so it's basically not in the way. So let me show you what I mean by doing that. Alright, there you guys have it. I actually, rather than a ½ inch cut, I went ahead and did a 1 inch cut, so I had a little extra room. But you can see how it's mounted in there. I was fortunate enough to be able to use some of the old clamps, and I had one extra to give it that OEM look, so I didn't have to put the cheap silver screw clamps on there, if you can see that. So there's the driver's side there. And there's the passenger side. And it's kind of nice because, unfortunately, you got your oil dipstick right here, so you're able just to kind of move it out of the way if you need to. So it actually kind of works out. But what we're going to do next, we've got to get this cross brace out of here. And to do that, we got two screws, one here, you can see that, one here, I'm sorry, two nut and a bolt. Same with the other side. And then we have a lower one we got to take out, if you can see down there. And what we're going to try to do is remove these two screws here and reposition the power steering cooler down to that mount down there, so it'll be out of the way. So let's go ahead and see if we can get those out real quick. Alright guys, there it is, it's out. And it wasn't just 5 bolts like I thought. Of course, nothing ever is easy. I had to use brain power, which is never easy itself. So what I had to do to get this thing out, I did have to remove the upper radiator hose. It was kind of common sense there. I knew I was going to have to. I was just trying to avoid it. And all you're going to do is take the clamp off there, and pop it out. Little FYI, basically when this car is sitting flat, what's happening is it's clamping against that brace, the shock tower, whatever you want to call it. And what you have to do, of course these cars are low, I already have it up on blocks because it sits parked that way. I had a jacket from the side and then a jacket from underneath. If you can see this front brace, which you don't want to keep it left jacked like this, but temporarily get it up so those shock towers will pull away from each other and it'll loosen this brace up. But that's not it. So after you do that, you have these tiny little rivets that are going to give you hell, one on each side. And what I did was I was prying it over and it was coming. I decided to effectively remove one of them. In fact, if I could go back, I'd remove both of them. Just because it's a lot easier just to replace these rivets, even from the inside, than it is having to worry about and replace parts when you're trying to pry things and worry about breaking things. A little old school tip. I have a nice old slugger here, and I actually use it to pry, to get down and pry, because the wood's a lot softer, obviously, than metal on metal. So that helped me get it out. So what we're going to do now, knowing that that's out, is clean up some of the radiator fluid that dropped down here, the coolant, and I'm going to get a bracket made and mounted with this power steering cooler. So let's go ahead and get to that real quick. Alright, so the next step here is going to be taking the main serpentine belt off. This is actually really easy. You're going to use that same 15mm socket that you used to take off the bolts for the brace, the strut tower brace. And all you're going to do is crank it clockwise, slide off the belt like so, slowly release it. Simple as that. And what we're going to do is just pull the rest of the belt off and set it outside of the way. Alright, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to rotate this clamp here on the lower radiator hose, face pretty much like 7 o'clock-ish, to keep that away and basically out of the way and give room for the supercharger belt and pulley. Alright, as you can guess it now, we're going to pull off the main crank pulley. So we're going to go ahead and remove the 6 bolts down here. They look like they're probably, I don't know, 1/2 inch or maybe 13 millimeter. We're going to pull all 6 of those off. We'll pry that thing off, and then we're going to have to mate up the new supercharger pulley to it. Okay, so back to the power steering cooler. It actually doesn't reach, if you'll notice, all the way down where I want it to go. So we are going to have to get some new hose and extend this. Now this is an oddball size, at least on the Gen 2, it's 11/32. Fortunately, AutoZone did have it in stock, and it was only like $2.50 a foot where I'm at. You could probably take the upper and swap it with the lower and then buy just the upper, but at that price you might as well replace both, considering that they're hoses. So I'm going to go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I am going to detach the cooler, and I'll mount that first, and then I'll cut my lines to fit. And I'll also, at the same time, be draining out all the old power steering fluid. And we are using Prestone as of right now because apparently that is one that works with the Gen 2s. So let me go ahead and start this out. Alright, so it's out. One recommendation I would make, this is actually copper, and if you look, you can see I kind of flattened, if it'll focus, I kind of flattened one of those when I was prying it off or twisting the hose to get it loose. If you're replacing your hoses completely, I suggest just cutting it off and then basically removing it while you have it out of the car, because obviously being copper, it'll bend back, but you don't want to have to disfigure these things. I can use a screwdriver and get it back to where it needs to be, but just kind of heads up, I'd cut them off and then pull them. So, alright, so I had a bracket, a stainless steel one I wanted to utilize. I had to widen out the center a little bit, but here we go. Basically what it's going to be doing, I can kind of do this with one hand without it jumping all over the place, is lining it kind of like so, and it'll be lowering it, but lowering the bracket actually is going to raise the cooler so it isn't so low to the ground. So hopefully that'll fit. I'm going to go ahead and try to install it right now. Alright, so there it is. Thanks again to the Jet Ski World for all the stainless hardware. Three bolts and a stainless steel bracket. The driver's side of it is sticking up just a hair, and the reason why is it needs to make clearance because of the frame rails for the tubes to clear. So no big deal there. But it's snug. Even with that one bracket, I can't even move it, so it shouldn't go anywhere. So now we're going to go ahead and take off the other lines and cut and fit the new lines. Alright guys, it's time for a couple more quick tips for you. First of all, I want you to know that this hose, this 11/32, is very thick and is very difficult to get on hose barbs. So it's a smart choice, since you already have it off and you already have fluid down here, to go ahead and get the insides of the tube with a little bit of the same power steering fluid. I don't typically like to mix fluids, so I just used a little bit of the old power steering fluid that's kind of down in the pan, just to get it lubed up enough so it'll slide over. Second tip is I also orientate the clamps a little bit further down the hose, exactly how I want them, so I don't have to try to fight and try to find them or twist it around once I get it down there, so they're set to go. The lower one's on right now. Now I have to slide up the upper. Okay, so both hoses are installed now. You can kind of see there and there. What we're going to be doing now is topping off with the Prestone power steering fluid. And there was a lot of debate on which one to use, and something about Dodge going to automatic transmission fluid, but apparently that turned out to be for the Gen 3s and up, or something or another. But everybody said they were going to try and use this one. I haven't heard any complaints online, so I'm going to try it. My luck, it'll probably be wrong, but whatever, that's what I'm using. I am going to fill up the reservoir here. Just FYI, because the car's incapacitated right now and I cannot start it, when you first start this car, you're probably going to forget after all this work. Remember, you're going to have to bleed the system, so just basically pumping or turning the wheel left to right, left to right, left to right, and burping the system so you can get the air bubbles out of that lower cooler down there. And then eventually what will happen is the level will drop, and then you'll have to fill up a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that up now, though. Alright, hopefully you guys can see in this image. It's kind of an awkward position for the camera, but I'm going to show you how we get everything set up. So first thing we want to do is we want to get our mounting bracket mounted on. And FYI, you want to put on your oil return line right now, because if you don't, you won't be able to tighten the clamp. So go ahead and get the extra footage, maybe 3 or 4 feet, whatever you need, and clamp that upper hose on. Then we're going to go ahead and we are going to take all the bolts. We're going to bolt this bracket onto the main unit itself. We'll want to use washers and Loctite for obvious reasons. So I'll go ahead and put a little Loctite on there. Now keep in mind this unit was used, so I don't know how great the screws are. I've hand threaded them in to test them, but I don't know that that's going to be super sufficient, but we're going to try. Two more here, get a little more Loctite on it. See here, we got our Loctite on it. Last one. Loctited. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to use our impact to first get it going. Nice and tight. Alright, as you can see, they're all in. Again, I don't know the torque ratings, so we're going to do this by hand and kind of common knowledge. I'm going to torque it down nice and tight. Nothing crazy, we don't want to strip it, it is aluminum. But we want it nice and tight so that Loctite has something to grab a hold of. Alright, there's our bracket, if you guys can see that. All mounted on. Next thing to do is put on our pulley. Now it looks to me like they've actually changed this design compared to the original photos. It has 2 positions for the pulley. I imagine that if you needed extra room to tighten a belt or whatnot. We're going to put on the tightest for now, which I believe is this outer one here. So we're going to set the knob inside the hole, and the screw will line up after I get a little bit of Loctite on it. We will get a washer, slide our screw down, get it going by hand. Go ahead and crank this one down too. Same thing. Ah, there we go. Alright, so that's all set. Now typically the next step, what we would do, we would install the supercharger pulley itself, which I have opted into by the 3.5 inch pulley. Normally it's 3.75 or 3 3/4 inch, which means the smaller the pulley, the more boost. For the same price, why wouldn't I go with more boost? Since I have the capability to do it, I'm going to do it. But this very moment, I am not going to put this on, and the reason why is because of that 10 rib lower belt pulley. I want to go ahead and fit the supercharger itself just to ensure that I'm getting this exactly where I need it to be so it lines up belt to belt. You see, I went ahead and used a wire brush wheel to clean up some of this edging, where obviously this was used and it, from the belts wearing around it after a while, it gets black markings on it. I also went ahead and polished up the front of the supercharger. By no means does it look like polished aluminum. They have an option for that. This one is definitely not. You can see that Paxton's the quality is just not great. I'm thinking about having it powder coated. As of right now, it kind of looks like pot metal. Kind of like when you went to Pizza Hut as a kid and you walked past that quarter machine and all you could think about the whole time eating was that stupid little trinket toy, and you came up with some weird excuse to your parents that you had to have it as you left and they gave you that quarter. Yeah, it looks like the same stuff. But anyways, what we're going to do right now is we are going to temporarily mount this thing to the car, see how it lines up, and we'll come back and fit that pulley. Alright, so our next step for the crank is going to be removing the main center nut. It's actually like about 31 millimeters. I don't know what that comes out to in standard. But I got a 32 and it seems to hold it good enough, so I'm going to use my 32. Hopefully I don't strip it. Something to keep in mind with these, they are typical left hand out. So something you'll probably want to do is put it in first gear, put the emergency brake on, and then you might have to use a cheater bar. If that doesn't work, have somebody hold the brakes if the car's moving. And if it's still not breaking loose, you'll have to use heat. But from what I hear, they come off pretty easy, so let's go ahead and try. Okay, guys, there it is. It's broke loose. I don't know what they're talking about because I had a cheater bar and everything, and the whole car was moving forward, even with the e-brake on. So ultimately, the tool that was able to break it loose was that right there. I was able to use my 32 millimeter socket along with the swivel connection. I think the actual standard metric size, or the standard size it's supposed to be, is 1.25 inches. So obviously, if you have one of those, you should probably use that. Though it didn't seem to harm the bolt when I was taking it out. Big shout out to Boosted Motorsports. He's the one that actually had the tip on how to do that. So it definitely was a saver there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and pull this bolt out real quick, and we're going to get ready to bolt in and set up our and drill our pin kit into it. So let me get this bolt out. All right, so here is our crank pin kit. This one is from Row Racing. Big shout out to Scott at Row Racing. Amazing person, wealth of knowledge, great to deal with. So I'd highly suggest you guys working with him in the future for any parts or things you may need. Not a support or a sponsor of the video at all. Just like I said, good relationship, good person. So anyhow, I chose the Row kit over top of the Paxton kit, and the reason why, actually a couple reasons why. First one, I liked the look of the jig much better. It seemed bigger, heavier duty, and easy to use since it bolts to the actual crank itself. The other thing that I really liked about it is the fact that everybody online talked about how strong the pins were. There was some hearsay that the Paxton kits had problems with the pin shearing. I don't know the truth to that, but like I said, I trusted Row. It was a little bit cheaper as well, and it was here in a couple days, so definitely a big shout out to them. One of the things you're going to want to do with this, it comes with the drill bit supplied. You want to mark it off 2.45 inches from the top. The reason why is you don't want to over drill. So basically what I did was mark with a piece of tape. You can do it with a marker or anything that's bright enough so you can at least see when that drill bit's spinning. You'll kind of get an idea of the length. It's about the same length as your pins. So basically you don't want to over drill and drill too far into your crank. So let's go ahead and get this thing bolted onto the crank real quick and get this thing ready to drill. Alright guys, there we go. So it's in now, or on I should say, and so basically what we're going to do now, get one of the holes to the 12, well, as close to the 12 o'clock position as you can. We're going to take our drill, we're going to run our drill down into it, again all the way down to our tape point, stop, and then we will have to basically maneuver this crank to get the second one to the 12 volt, or 12 o'clock position, so we can drill that as well. You can kind of bounce the car back and forth in gear to move it that way. You can put the crank bolt back on if you want to. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Either way, however you choose, it's fine, just as long as you get that crank turned over. So let's go ahead and get these things drilled out. Alright, there you go guys. It's all drilled out, ready to go. It was not bad at all. It actually went pretty quick. I did use WD-40 to lube it while I was drilling. And I also halfway through on the first one double checked that the tape didn't move, which I didn't figure it would, but just to be safe I wanted to make sure that it didn't slide and us drill too far in. So that drill is oddly very much similar to being at the dentist, so I can see why people get scared to go to the dentist. It's kind of weird, but anyhow, that's pretty much it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to vacuum out all the debris out of here, get that jig off, and we're going to tap in our pins. Let me show you what it looks like when it's all done. Alright, so there's the pins ready to be tapped in. They are a pretty tight fit, so you might have a tough time with a hammer. If a hammer for some reason doesn't work, you always can get a air chisel with a hammer bit to knock that in. Another note I wanted to tell you too is when you're drilling through, you'll feel when it gets through that dampener and gets to the crank, you'll feel kind of the noise of the drill change. And also, I would wear probably earplugs. It's pretty loud and whiny. But what I wanted to tell you is, as far as the jig, I actually had to tap mine on. You can see kind of the couple of hammer marks there. There's a very tight fit, which is a good thing. You guys may not have to, but I had tight tolerances and I had to tap it on. So we're gonna go ahead and tap those in here and get ready to put that pulley on. Alright guys, so here is our supplied crank kit. You have the main 7-rib crank pulley, and then you have the 8-rib supercharger pulley. 6 5/16 1-inch hex screws. Then there are 6 original bolts that will hold the main pulley on, and of course I'm going to red Loctite the main bolt, as well as the bolts that hold the main pulley in, and then I will use blue Loctite on the secondary pulley. I'm not really sure why. For whatever reason, they put blue Loctite in the red one and red in the blue one. I never really figured that out, but whatever. I'm going to mix the both of them, like I said, between the parts. So let me get that on real quick, and I'll show you what it looks like. Alright guys, I'm glad I caught that. I didn't get the supplied bolts for the original or 7-belt crank pulley, and they have to be 1 inch long. The ones that come in or that came out of it are like just over ½ inch. So I kind of thought so when I looked at the thickness of these cranks because they're aluminum as opposed to steel. And I only had a few turns until it was tight. So make sure you guys get yourself some 1 inch 5/16 inch grade 8 bolts. If you don't, you'll have problems. Alright, so both cranks are installed. Again, the main 7-belt crank got put on with red Loctite, and the Supercharger 8-rib belt pulley got put on with blue. So they're installed. I went ahead and put on the belt, or the 7-rib belt, the main belt, before I put on the secondary pulley because I wasn't sure the clearance, and I'm still not because my rack is still unbolted from when we were messing with the power steering. So I didn't know how much clearance we have. I would assume we would have had enough to slide this down in, and it looks like we do, but I went ahead and put it on just to be safe. So let's keep moving forward. Okay, so what I'm doing now, I'm going back and I'm tightening the bolts down and Loctiting them for the Supercharger unit itself. Initially, it was just a retro or a test fit for the power steering coolant lines and all that. So now we're gonna go back in. We're bolting everything back down. I just bolted this back down with red Loctite. I'm gonna put blue Loctite on the power steering pump. And then blue Loctite putting the Supercharger back on. I also have to put the bolts and the shims back into the steering rack. So let me get to that. Alright, I went ahead and already replaced my tensioner pulley. It was actually bad. That's irrelevant to the build. However, we do have to put the one of the main pulleys back on right now for the water pump. So let's go ahead and get that on there, and we're going to put the belt on to get it out of the way. Alright guys, so as you see, the belt is on now. I went ahead and got the 2 lower bolts to hold the rack and pinion back in, and I went ahead and put a couple zip ties to zip tie the wiring harness down to the sway bar. I don't see anything in the manual as far as where to put it, or can see anywhere basically to put it anywhere else. So that's where it's going for now. Now it's time to officially bolt the Supercharger on. So let's get that done. Alright guys, to start, we're going to start with the 2 shorter 2-inch bolts. Getting everything lined up, what you'll see is it's the second bolt hole down on the right hand side. It's going to go into the long shaft sticking out of the mount, and then there will be another one down here that'll stick into that bolt, and then after that we'll have to mount the longer spacer. So let's get the first 2 shorter ones in first, somewhat hand tight, and then we'll get in the longer ones. Alright guys, now it's time for the longer bolts and the spacers. Again, I'm using blue Loctite on all these bolts. One spacer will go right here. The other one will go, it's hard to see, but there's a bolt hole down there. It's going to go right there. So let's get those on real quick, and then we'll tighten it all down. So there it is, all bolted in with all 4 bolts, Loctited and torqued down, so it's ready to go. Just kind of a tip. I had this pulley on backwards, and if you'll notice, it's got a spacer on there, which means it was pushed farther out. I almost screwed up and broke this plastic power steering pulley because it was pushing against it, so I had to take it back off and turn it around. Just kind of FYI, I meant to level it out to make sure it was even, and I didn't, so don't make that mistake, please. But we're going to move forward now and keep building. I'd like you to meet the crew chief. Number 1, he's the one that calls all the shots. What do you think, Toby? It's good? He says it's good. Time to install the Supercharger pulley. So we're going to go ahead and pull this thing out. We'll get it wrapped around. We'll show you what it looks like. Alright, so I'm going to be upfront with you. That was not easy. Not like you'd like it to be. You guys are not going to be happy at this part. So you're going to have to unsnug these bolts that are holding the Supercharger in. No, don't take them out. Just unsnug them. But one will come out, and that is this one right here. Because what you have to do is you have to snake that belt around the crank pulley between there, and snake it between here, so it'll have to be loose to get in there. The one side of the belt goes on the other side of this bolt. And then what you'll do is you'll put a pry bar in here like so to loosen the belt up, the tensioner, and get it around it. Once you got that all down, you'll start tightening everything back. And what I had to do to get this last bolt back in, because it was cocked at an angle, is leverage it that way and push against it to get this thing up. But it's on now, so have fun with it. That wasn't that fun. Alright guys, so the next step is going to be taking off the front bumper so we can get the intercooler mounted and some plumbing ran. Now, taking off my bumper is probably not going to be like taking off your bumper, and the reason I say that, years back this car was a theft recovery, and I don't know that it's bolted on the same as it was originally. It could be, but I don't think it is. What I do know to get mine off, there's bolts along the inside here, there are bolts going through the inside up here. There are a couple underneath there, and then some all the way across the bottom behind that lip. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it off. Again, yours might be different from that, so I would suggest maybe looking up online what the specific procedure is. But let me get this thing off real quick. Alright, so the upper bolts are out. Now we got to get this electrical connector out. We're going to go ahead and push out on that red piece there. Push the button in, if we can get to it, and disconnect it. Now I've got two more lower bolts that I can see got to pull out, and I'll pull this thing right out. Alright, so the next step is to take out the radiator fan. Being that I need to fit the piping to the actual supercharger, I need to be able to get down in there. So we're going to take off a few bolts, top and bottom. We're going to pull this thing out. Alright, so now that's out of the way, you can clearly see there's a lot more room in here to work with. Even though it's a very thin radiator, it takes up enough to where you can't work on anything. Alright, yes, I know this is all filthy. This is from me testing the aluminum cutting yesterday, but just another tip. Again, I think I've shared this with you before, but a way that works for me for cutting these hoses down when you don't have a PVC cutter that's big enough to fit in, I go ahead and I clamp it to where I want it cut off, and I try to make sure that it's perfectly square up and down. And then once it's nice and tight, I go ahead and take a hacksaw and I cut it all along that seam until it's completely cut through. And it gives me pretty straight cuts. I've had good luck so far. Alright, so there it is, the size I actually need there. After I'm done cutting, what I do, I take my little baby crack torch, and I light up all the edges and get rid of all the fuzzies around the edges of it. And it leaves the side looking like that. So that's pretty much the way I cut it. Let me continue fitting. Here's the lower bolts. One. There's two. Let's see if we can wiggle this thing loose. Kind of stuck on that bottom left side one there. And there it comes. Alright, so there's the bumper. It's off. Here's the support. You can see where it was probably smacked up before. Like I said, it was stolen, and I think they ran the front end or something. It used to have, the former owner said it used to have this really big, goofy-looking front bumper that kind of swooped out. And I actually remember seeing a picture of a silver one, which was probably this one, online, that had that goofy bumper. It was ridiculous looking. I couldn't figure out why. If I look at this picture right here, to get an idea of mounting the intercooler, I couldn't figure out why is my front cut out, and that's probably why, because that goofy bumper was on there. But it's going to be a little bit more work, because if you look at the actual supports, the fiberglass needs redone, so that's going to be a project I'm going to have to do while we have this off. But I think what's going to happen if I'm looking at this, my intercooler is going to have to fit between these brackets, so this one here and one on the other side. So this whole lower section that you'll see right here is going to have to be cut out, which means we need this front support. So I'm going to have to rebuild this. And if I'm going to rebuild all this, then I might as well go ahead and fix all that junk. So I'll probably do that here in the next couple days. But first I'm going to have to start chopping it up to get the intercooler mounted. So let's kind of get an idea of that here now. You know, the more I look at this bumper, the more I really think it's a piece of crap. And if I'm going to do all this custom fabbing to it, why not just make one out of square steel tube? I think that's what we're going to do. Alright guys, there it is. That support is off, and we're going to start setting our intercooler where it's got to go, and then we'll work and build the support around it. Alright guys, so that is a wrap for this section today. I hope you enjoyed the video. As I always say, if you enjoyed it, please give a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Share with your friends, whatever helps the channel, obviously. Any comments, please leave them below. What you're seeing right here is, I know it looks terrible, but that's just an idea of, I'm trying to think about getting a wall banner or whatever. So if anybody out there is good with signs, let me know. Thinking about ordering something, or if you're good with sign design, let me know. Maybe you can make something better than I have sitting here. That said, thanks for tuning in. Stick around for the intercooler video coming up next.